There it goes. Okay, good morning. We will get started. You know, there's always people that like to watch the recording after, so it's fantastic. So welcome, everyone, and welcome to Dale Sinclair from WSP in the UK. Thanks for staying up in the evening. And yeah, we're looking forward to hearing from you. I'm just going to do a bit of an intro, but do you want to just say hi, Dale, before I get started?
Yeah, hi everyone. Great to be here tonight. Your morning. And yeah, looking forward to sharing some of the experiences we've got delivering some projects from the UK.
Great, thanks, Dale. So today is going to run, I'm going to do a bit of an intro, just a bit of an update on where things are at with the innovation work stream, just real quick, and then we're going to jump over and Dale's going to give us a presentation for half an hour or so, and then we're going to have lots of time for discussion and questions. Thank you to those people who have sent through your questions already, a few ones that we can get started on there. I know I have many. I've spent a bit of time with Dale and hearing about his projects, and yeah, I know that if you don't have any questions, Dale and I will sit here and chat, and you can just listen in. So just to give you a bit of context, I know there's quite a few people on the call that haven't been to an Accord event before. Not sure why it's not changing slides yet. Let's try it this way. Here we go. Just to remind you that, you know, the Accord is a government industry partnership. We sit in between, really trying to drive those areas of system change, real focus on productivity, to keep it simple. My area is where digital meets offsite manufacturing and everything in between. And so I feel like today is a really good example of where those two meet, which was one of the reasons why we really chose to have this session today. So just to bring you up to speed with, get rid of this, some of the work that's going on already in the digital area. We have a work program mapped out and has already begun, managed by NZIOB, Pam and the team, and BIM and NZ. There's about 20 or so people, actually probably more now, on that working group, driving ahead a work program, updating the BIM handbook, aligning with ISO, really looking at how we connect the BIM requirements back up into government procurement to get more of this happening. Potentially some data sharing standards might need to come out of this, and there'll be a lot of like information and capacity building, more like capability building. So that's happening. And then the other piece, which is really just been kicking off over the last couple of months, as the Commerce Commission especially has come out with their recommendation that offsite is one of the ways that, or I like to call it modern methods of construction now, because offsite sometimes excludes a few people. But yeah, it's been really pushed at the government level as a way to achieve efficiency and productivity. So we have there's the Commerce Commission blurb. I'm going to quickly get off this slide, but basically the significant thing that's come out of the government response, how it works: Commerce Commission comes out with the recommendation, government responds. We'll make sure this is available, but the government have suggested that all departments have a 10% minimum year-on-year increase in the amount of offsite solutions that they are procuring, which is exactly what we want. This needs to be demand-led. Anyone that's been in this area for a while knows that, you know, it's been pretty volatile and up and down, and some companies, you know, haven't lasted because they haven't had the demand. So since I've been working on this topic, you know, I've been really working behind the scenes to make that case for government increasing their demand. So it's fantastic this is happening. So our work program, this is the last slide I'm going to show before we get into Dale, is mapped out. There's a government forum that we have with about 30 people that participate every couple of months, each developing their strategy, really making sure we share lessons learned. There's a couple of the ministries that have pretty good experience and sharing that with the others, looking at these targets and how we might set them, how we might record them. It sounds simple, but it's not, trust me. Then on the industry side, we're going to do a bunch of work in partnership with Offsite NZ, looking at definitions. What is MMC, OSM? What's it? You know, how do we kind of, I don't know if you remember some of the conversations with Mark Farmer a little while ago, but how do we define, you know, the difference between volumetric and panels, and how do we kind of communicate that and have a common language about that? Going to do a bunch of information gathering from the market. Government procurement really struggles to know what to purchase and who from and how, and contracts, a lot of confusion on the government side on that area. We are going to start to look at standardization. What elements might we be able to standardize? How can kit of parts actually be connected? What data sharing? What sort of platform? And that's where, you know, some of Dale's insight and experience will help us really think about how we move towards that type of platform. And then information and communication tools like the business case that we're working on now, really connecting into what's happening with code changes that come through 2030, and lots of partnerships, lots of talking and bringing people to this conversation. So that was a real fly through. I just wanted to give you a taste of what's going on behind the scenes between digital and offsite manufacturing or modern methods of construction, so that you get some context as to why we're starting to ramp up these types of knowledge sharing sessions. And any of you who are going to the Offsite NZ conference next week, look forward to seeing you there. We'll talk about this a little bit more. So I'm going to stop presenting and hand over to you, Dale. Let's see, stop sharing. There we go.
Thank you, Jane.
Do you want to start with just a little bit more of a background on your experience as an architect and then your role now? I think that's quite fascinating for people to kind of know where you've come from and how you've landed up in your with your title now as digital lead innovation digital, where those things all meet. So it'd be awesome once you get yourself sharing there. That's it. I can see your screen. Fantastic.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Jen, and I will do that to start. So yeah, great to be here tonight to explain to you some of the things that we're doing. But I guess for me, that I'm so excited about this shift to manufacturing. You know, as an architect and just as a construction professional, for me, I've always been interested in process and how the process of making buildings. So I think 15 years ago, I published my first book on design management. On the bottom left, I was the lead author for the RIB Plan of Work 2020, and I wrote all the corresponding publications. And it's not on here, but I also published the 2020 update. So I was the lead author for the first version of the RIB Plan of Work DfMA overlay to the Plan of Work. So very much interested in how we make that transition and very much interested in the process. But more importantly is I'm just finishing writing a new book. And I think, you know, what's exciting, not just for me as an architect, but as we move to what I think will be a paradigm shift in how we design buildings, is there is so much out there. And in the last year or so, I've read more than 100 books, and every book I read, so even some traditional things, 100-year-old books that are in there, like you'll see Adolf Loos in here. I think there's so much to be learned by just seeing what's out there. And, you know, that's why I'm a great believer in serendipity, not like trying to think what you're trying to change, but just look at what's happening out there. So super excited to be looking. I mean, you'll see even books here in AI. Everyone's talking about Chat GPT just now, but there's so many things that I think that will drive how we redesign buildings into the future. But what I want to show you tonight is specifically some of the things that we're doing. And of course, the big change is net zero. So certainly in the UK, a lot of people will say, well, hold on a minute. We had some big hitters in the past, like Ethan and Latham doing strategies, and we just kept reverting back to construction. Why is this different? And I think net zero is the difference. There's an imperative now. We have to change as an industry. There's no option. We've got to get the carbon out of our buildings. But even in thinking about how you do that, and we've got lots of people that are looking at net zero, for me and my team, the two main levers are around offsite manufacturing, because offsite manufacturing will take waste out of the process and so on and so forth, and digital technologies. Now, I just got a couple of slides to contextualize the digital technology piece, but I really want to focus this talk on how we really move towards manufacturing and why that's such a different kind of proposition to designing for construction. And in terms of technology, so my team are actively monitoring more than 100 technologies. So we're actually looking at these every single day. I would say this slide is probably a few months out of date, but the point is there's lots of technologies out there. I am going to make a few references to some of the books I've been reading in the last year, because I think, again, there's lots of content out there that really makes you think differently about how you work as a professional. The reason I love this book is it talks about how bringing two technologies together becomes transformative. And if I've got 100 technologies, you can only begin to imagine what that means. Now, for me, I think there's been two paradigm shifts in how we design buildings. So this chap here, Brunelleschi, and some of his colleagues invented the whole notion of a scale drawing. Now, think about that. Buildings like the Colosseum in Rome, or any building before the Middle Ages, was built without a set of drawings. I mean, I think in the world of laser surveying and so on, it's just unimaginable about how you would build some of these buildings without drawings beforehand. And I think the other important thing about the scale paradigm is that I think the scale drawing sort of CAD, because we eventually gave in to, you know, we drew things in 2D in full size, but then we pushed out to the scale drawing. I'm still seeing that as a massive problem with our BIM strategies. We're modeling things in 3D, we're putting in more data, but we're still pushing out to the scale drawing, which to me is a shame, actually, because it starts to create a lot of waste in the process. And I think the second period of innovation, really important to the construction industry, was around when Bessemer invented the new steel processes, and out of that time scale came Otis inventing the lift, and a whole ton of other things. Lighting was invented in buildings. And if you think about New York in the early 20th century, that was all driven from that period of huge innovation in the systems that we did. And out of those systems came all of the structural engineers and MEP engineers. So I think for me, that's the two important things. And I think we're on the cusp of the third revolution, if you like, here, and a real paradigm shift in how we design buildings. Now, a couple of points I'm going to make about how design is going to change. So I read this book a few years ago. This was one of the best £20 I ever spent. It was around decision making. And certainly with my team, we looked at what do we mean by decision making? We realized that even for something as simple as a staircase, it takes 150 decisions, which we tend to make intuitively. And I'm going to come to that point before I get onto the manufacturing side. Certainly within my team in the UK, we're realizing that with smart building technologies and all these other things, that buildings are becoming more complex design, and we just can't actually do that into the future intuitively. There's just simply too many decisions to be made, and too many decisions that we've never made in the past. So certainly a lot of the things that we're doing just now is how do we get that decision making down, not to try and hamstring the design process, but to actually create the time to think about the challenges of the future. So how do we deliver net zero around that? The other thing that you'll see lots and lots of things about out there are this whole notion about data-led decisions. There's some brilliant people out there. There's a book I was recommending to one of our ops guys recently about, how data can actually drive bad decision-making. And I think what you'll see is a lot of things about, well, when should we use our gut intuition as a designer, and when should we use data? So I think we'll see more and more of that around the design process, and when should we make decisions based on gut, and when should we use data? And I could probably recommend 20 books to kickstart that whole conversation about that really important point. Now, the other thing is that what I see in the way that we design buildings just now, it's a really inefficient process. So I'm not going to go into the software tools that you use, but I'm sure you're using the same tools as me. But what I see in that when I start to look at things is that we, even in creating in a building simple things like staircases, we end up with lots of different options. And what I see is, well, hold on a minute, why are we not just creating a catalogue of staircases and using it? Now, that catalogue could come from me as an architect, it could come from suppliers. So the big thing I'm going to be talking about today is the benefit of digital catalogues and how those actually transform how we design buildings, why we don't need to reinvent how to design a staircase every time, and how to make sure that every single project smashes it. And I guess every time I go down a staircase, when I see a vertical piece of handrailing, I'm like, yeah, didn't work there. So it's incredible how people that design buildings every day can actually still design products within a building that are not actually proper. But what I see is the big opportunity for us as architects and as an industry is, so construction has never quite nailed it in terms of getting the productivity improvements of the manufacturing sector. So for me, the big proposition here is how do we leverage the massive productivity coming out of manufacturing and bring that to the construction sector, which will drive down costs, allow us to deliver buildings faster and better. And certainly everything I see suggests that offsite manufacturing delivers every single metric around carbon, around health and safety. The only area that we're not really smashing it just now is cost. So I'm going to tackle that heads on in this talk today. But certainly the big thing for me is if you take 20% of the construction output, whether it's New Zealand or the UK. So in the UK, if I take 20% of construction and push that into the factory, that would be 500,000 people that are all of a sudden don't have to go to a construction site. I can place them anywhere in the UK. So what we're seeing is that whole proposition drives new social value propositions because I can place those 500,000 jobs anywhere in the UK. So what we're seeing is that shift is, it's not just about moving from construction to manufacturing. We can drive a lot of other benefits from that to the broader economy of our countries. Now, in the UK, we've had the construction playbook, which talks about platforms, and I think that discussion is really good. I think it's difficult sometimes to unpack what that actually means for us as an industry. But simplistically, the way I see it is the way that the car industry has used platform approaches is they basically standardize across the things that you don't see. So the chassis of different cars. So you might drive a Porsche and not realize that that's got the same components as a Volkswagen. So lots of different commonality the customer's not aware of. But I think when people talk about platforms, what they don't realize is that there's a flip side. So we're also seeing a huge shift in the industries towards customer experience and the customer being able to select things downstream. So real shift towards standardization to drive down costs, but then actually giving that back to the customer or the customer's customer to allow them to co-create is what we might call it in the way that we design buildings. And frequently people say to me, well, why do you not design buildings more like Johnny Ives did for Apple? And of course, my flippant answer to that sometimes, well, buildings are bigger than an iPhone. But actually, when you think about that further, look at this ship here. It's still made in a factory. It's made in and then it's sailed to its client. Similarly for planes, Boeing have got massive factories in Seattle and they build planes and then they fly them to the customer. So buildings are so unique in terms of why we actually take them to site. And lots of reasons for that. Every site is different. The planning departments are different. But those are the challenges that we need to overcome. And what you'll see from our presentation today is people will tell me all the time, well, you can't do what you're doing because buildings are different, sites are different, planners are different, blah, blah, blah. Now we need to break that cycle. What we need to do is really start to think about why we can start to design buildings like products or platforms. And what you'll see in some of the things I show you today is sometimes a product approach might be appropriate and sometimes a platform approach might be appropriate. But the key thing is we've got to move away from that project process. Now, a big thing I've realized, so as I said, I wrote the first iteration of the DfMA overlay to the Arabic plan of work. And one of the things we said is that if you don't embrace offsite manufacturing in the concept stage, you're basically hard baking construction into your designs. And certainly, having designed buildings for many years for construction, we've always had manufacturing. So a lot of architects will say, yeah, I've done offsite manufacturing, I've done precast frames, I'm doing design intent. Now, that's a different type of manufacturing because we're still designing the way we've done, and we're just taking pieces of the building and pushing them into manufacturing. Now, recently, I've really been amping up the whole rhetoric around DfMA. Now, DfMA is a different design process altogether because I'm designing for manufacturing. I'm not designing for construction. Yes, there will be residual construction, so maybe landscaping and some of the elements that we do, and I'm going to come on to this, will still be designed for construction, but the whole essence is we're designing for manufacturing. It is not the same thing. It's a completely different proposition to design for construction. And this is the single biggest problem that we see as teams that are used to doing this. All of us, myself included, I've been designing for construction for more than 30 years. So designing for manufacturing is a new learning curve, even for me. Now, the way I see it is that the main thing that is holding back offsite manufacturing is cost, because we use traditional construction and we just don't ever crack that kind of difference between the two. But what you can see over here is when we start to look at standardization, we start to look at potentially aggregating content. So we're now actually starting to encourage clients to come together and say, well, hold on a minute, you're doing 1,000 toilet pods, we're doing 1,000 toilet pods. If we can amalgamate those, we can begin to bring savings. So a big change for us in the future is if you continue to order small quantities into the factory in a single project that has not been standardized, you will get high costs. But the more you look at how you do things and have pattern books or digital catalogs, the more you can start to drive down costs. But the crucial thing here is shifting away from that single project kind of mentality. Now, what we see in the UK is definitely two rates of change just now. There's people that are optimizing what they've done their whole life, and there's a paradigm shift. Now, it won't take you much to suss out that this is where I'm trying to face. We can certainly see that paradigm shift around the corner. Yes, I think a lot of what happens in the construction industry will still optimize what we do. But for me, the exciting side of this is trying to drive towards that paradigm shift. And bizarrely, the analogies that we use, someone recently called it, we're working for a UK contractor just now, and they've decided to call it the Airfix kit. But the Lego analogy is fantastic. And I don't have time today to talk about this, but there's a great story around how Lego changed their business model so that they could make kits from the Taj Mahal to the White House using more standard bricks. And really, that's what a kit of parts is all about. This is a project that we've worked on with Mace. So this was a proof of concept we did for an aviation project. So this was about how do we take a kit of parts, how do we standardize what we do so that we can, when we're asked by Mace to do a pier for an airport, that we're much faster and more agile in what we do. And on the back of this project, we've just finished delivering our first project in Manchester Airport, where we're moving from having 5,000 small things coming to site to 60 big things coming to site. So all of a sudden, the sort of things that we're talking about now is, well, how do I do the whole craneage strategy? Because now all of a sudden I've got finished cladding that's erected on steelwork, and I'm craning in 2-ton elements instead of 10-kilogram elements. So we're beginning to learn about how we bring all these different elements together. But this is what we see the future. The Lego that we have in construction is very different to the Lego that kits that our kids buy, because this stuff is really serious. It's big, it's heavy. And how do we do that? How do we bring finished components together? But we're beginning to figure that out on a lot of projects, and also figuring out how to bring construction management strategies and bring agile procurement processes to that whole methodology. We're also looking at how to shift the cost narrative. So from our kit of parts, we know what every piece of or component is. So each component's got a lot of data attached to it, and I can drive bills of materials from this catalog that I begin to create. We're also looking at how data can actually give every single component its own unique identity. So it's a part number, the same way if you've got a carburetor in a 1960 Ford Fiesta, you can find that carburetor quite easily. So we're beginning to look at how do we componentize things, but at the same time, if I'm doing a project, I want to know the unique identity of each truss so I can track it through manufacturing. So data is a huge piece of what we do. Another part of what my team are doing is really starting to look at the downstream customer experience. So we're speaking, or rather we're looking at how the car industry deals with this, and it's quite. I find the kind of Tesla BMW comparison really, really interesting, because Tesla actually have very few permutations. So Elon Musk can do a red kind of Tesla with a white interior, and he can smash out 100 through his factory this week. And he's already sold most of these. So he's got a really efficient traditional manufacturing process. Hence the reason I was absolutely laughing my head off recently when he dropped his prices, because he's running a very traditional process. BMW, on the hand, they have a huge number of permutations here. Now, of course, when I speak to people, they say, well, does this really feel any different in terms of configurations? Of course, a lot of people will say yes. But I think that's the whole narrative that we're starting to feel, to see is what's the difference here from a configuration perspective of a client versus the manufacturing difference. Because BMW, to make this work, have used IoT, they've used cloud technologies, and a whole bunch of robotics to allow this level of permutations. So we're seeing those conversations happening, and certainly in the residential sector. And in the few projects, we're looking at this at scale. So we're delivering hundreds of thousands of homes in some locations, and this needs a different strategy altogether. And I think this is maybe really pertinent to what you're doing in New Zealand, where you need to think about, well, how many units are we building? How might we build those? What are the quantities of the sub-assemblies? It could be toilet pods. How do we buy these? This is a framework agreement. How do we get new procurement partners in? And all of this then drives a manufacturing strategy. And then on top of this, we need to have a digital catalog that sets all of that. And at the same time, we're going to change the way we do it. And the biggest problem I see in this whole process is around the behaviors around changing the traditional design to construction process. A lot of this stuff that we're doing here is not that complex to do, but certainly changing people's behaviors about designing for construction is certainly the biggest problem. The other thing is just figuring out how does that work. And I think Jane already alluded to this, that there's challenges with bringing in country. So needless to say, we've got lots of clients in other countries across the world that are trying to bring in-country manufacturing. But in the short term, maybe you have to import some sub-assemblies from other locations. So the way we see it is that you need to deal for both. You need to look at how sub-assemblies play to both of these. You need to look at how those get brought together in an assembly factory, and you need to look at the transformed site process. And some clients are looking at putting all of this into a single bubble. I'm not convinced that that's the future. I think the future is looking at how you address these different components here, the three aspects of the sub-assemblies, the assembly, near site, and then how you bring all that together. We're also seeing the benefits that I've touched on already around the social value benefits, how you can increase productivity using robotics, but at the same time, you might position certain aspects in areas where there's unemployment, because all of a sudden those construction workers can be placed anywhere in the country. So in a proper country level manufacturing strategy, there's a combination of using robotics to get down cost and drive up productivity, and also using the value of where the humans can actually drive certain propositions. The site process changes, so site becomes very different because I'm not constructing things now, but I've got things coming to site super fast, so I still maybe need to put things in the ground. And this is back to the point I was making, you know, Johnny Ives doesn't have to deal with this when he's doing a new product, but we certainly need to do. Now, of all of these, I think where we've become really mature in the UK is some of the off-site buildings we've done recently. I've got some fantastic detailing. It's becoming so hard to tell the difference between a building that's made in the factory and one that's made through construction. But for me, the biggest challenge is around the services connections, because actually getting into the modules and how you fix things together is so much different to construction. So we're beginning to really understand the differences of how site changes in that offsite manufacturing model. And we're even starting to look at, well, even today, there was Ilke Homes have shut down their manufacturing facility. And I think that's about the third major offsite manufacturing company in the UK. So we need to have a conversation. And this, I think, is how it impacts you in New Zealand, is how do you change the whole investment model where offsite manufacturing has got huge offsite or huge investment costs. And I guess what we're saying to some clients is, well, maybe you begin to break down the whole operation and look at investment at different levels. And maybe you even start to have conversations about the software, the sensors, where you can actually start to look at repeatable processes around digital twins or other things. Maybe you're speaking to likes of ABB and looking at how robotics work across at a program level. Maybe you've got some universities in Wellington or wherever where you're actually starting to train people to set up and run agile kind of flying factories and so on and so forth. So I guess what we're advocating is that look at offsite manufacturing as a whole, but also look at the parts and how you might mobilize those differently. We're becoming familiar with the whole chassis. There's a recent study we did is there's something like 75 countries in the world that now have this experience. So my key insight to you here is don't bring in people from aerospace, don't bring in people from automotive. Offsite manufacturing at this kind of scale is different. And there are a lot of countries that now have the skill sets to advise on what to do to set up this. And picking this point, so if I create a structural chassis, I can push to a single building, maybe a villa, or maybe a single apartment block. Now, the manufacturing process for this is exactly the same, but yes, the site process is slightly different, and maybe I need an in situ concrete core here. But the key thing is the key element here is the same. And then we start to look at what goes into that. Well, yes, maybe we've got the toilets and the kitchens go into the chassis that go into these different building types. And then even within those toilets, we say, well, hold on a minute, let's try to not have 1,000 versions of a toilet. Let's standardize how that gets made. And then let's look at how the customer might create different interiors to that. So I guess I'll just keep reinforcing this point that designing for offsite manufacturing is very different. It's about trying to maximize what is repetitive, but at the same time allowing design change. So, think about that. As many product designers allowed as much change as possible. And similarly, a lot of clients have got design guidelines, and we're saying, well, you've got to make a shift around this optimization into having digital catalogs. So shifting away from guidelines to reusable digital content. We're seeing a shift to even what construction information is. So we've got one manufacturer we're working with that's actually thrown 1,200 drawings into the bin and now has 12 IKEA type drawings. So really simple elements that help to unlock unskilled labor in the factory and actually on site. I'm not going to dwell on this, but the whole construction process where you design a single project, you go through a competitive tender, completely changes in lots of different ways when you start to look at platform or product design. And I think that's an area that you need to look at. It's certainly an area that alongside the cultural changes where we see some of the biggest challenges, but there is huge opportunities if clients come together and say, well, hold on a minute, you've got 1,200 toilet pods, I've got 1,200 toilet pods. Why don't we get a framework that works together, that we can do things and actually look at how to drive down costs through our combined scale of what we're doing. Now, final couple of points before I hand back to Jane is that longer term, we design buildings, we demolish them, design buildings and demolish them. The circular economy is actually going to come to play at some point in time, and certainly for bigger buildings, not necessarily residential, we're going to see less demolition. That's a trend certainly we're seeing in London. It's becoming harder and harder to demolish a building. So we need to start looking at how we refurbish buildings, and maybe the design life of buildings becomes much, much longer. And of course, what that then means is we need to start to think about how we replace things, I mean, I find it amazing that, you know, in my kitchen at home, I've got no idea what my tap is. And I know if I have to replace it, I've got to crawl under that sink, get all the stuff that's in the cupboard underneath it out, and a very convoluted process. So why can't I just unplug that tap and push in a new one? So there's lots to be done to change how we design buildings for the future. And that's all part of this change about how we design buildings. So final couple of comments is, I do encourage you all to look at other business models. I do like the car industry one, and how the fact that there's a configurator process, but that configuration process ends with a code and a configuration being saved. It is not automated into fabrication. That's a separate process that happens. So there's a complete detachment between the way the factory works and the way the sale process works. If you look at IKEA, again, it's interesting. You can actually go on and you can design your own kitchen using their web tools, or if you're not familiar with how to use digital tools, someone will help you to do that. You can purchase it, and then a few days later, all these boxes will turn up in your house. Some companies are piggybacking that to actually then put all these boxes together for you in your own home. But the interesting thing from a manufacturing point of view, nothing changes. They keep churning out thousands and thousands of these boxes. So the whole configuration process has got no correlation with the manufacturing process. So really interesting things to be learned there. And if I go to the other end, this is an amazing shelving system, Tyclo, where you can actually do a parametric shelving design. You can change the heights, the widths, the density, the material. It instantly gives you a price. It will then push that into fabrication. Same thing, it comes in a box and you got to put it all together. Now, the main point about that is what we've got to learn from all these different processes is, well, what do we want for a building? How does that actually work? How does it work with the planning process? How does it work with the way, how much ability we want for the customer to configure what they do? So very, very different processes, but I think there's so much to be learned by looking at how other people design for manufacture. And final couple of points is, a lot of people say to me, so I said, well, why are you not looking at all this offsite manufacturing DfMA? They said, well, the clients are not asking for it. And my answer to that is, sorry, I disagree. I don't know a single client in the world that doesn't want their buildings faster, quicker, greener, and all these other metrics. So I think it's incumbent on us as construction professionals to drive this paradigm shift and to drive the carbon out of our buildings and to drive better business models for our clients. And my final point is really around what I call my three pig story. Now, every 5-year-old kid in the world understands how this story works, right? So we go from the straw house to the timber house to the brick house. That's how it works. It's a dead simple story. Like any kid, maybe even a 4-year-old understands that kid. So for me, the challenge for us about how we move as an industry is all about telling the three pig story backwards, because actually in reality, for a lot of the things that we're doing, we're trying to go from the brick house to the timber house, back to the straw house. And my story around that would be, look, any building that sequestrates is going to be an absolute golden gem into the future. So when our 5-year-old kids in the future can tell the three pig story backwards, that's when we know we've nailed the whole shift to net zero and a new manufacturing-led process of how we design buildings in the future. So thank you very much, and more than happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Dale. That was a fly through of the future for us. I've just looked at who's joined us, and there's quite a few people online that are pretty actively involved in this space. And one of the first questions that's come through is one that I had as well, and that's around these libraries that you talk of, this kind of idea of having this future kind of set of designs. Who owns them? Who's developing them now? Are they shared, or are they client by client?
Yeah, so I think they become best, back to my point, if they're aggregated across clients, then it becomes most effective. I mean, we had this challenge before, and Paul Morrell, when he was always used to talk, well, who owns the IP? And he always used to say the Queen. Of course, I think that would now be the King. But I think if the government's paying for these catalogues, the government owns the catalogues. And I think that the big point about digital catalogues, Jane, is just now as an architect, I can't buy a toilet pod. There is no, I can go to an IKEA website, as I've already shown. I can order a kitchen today. I can go and pick it up tomorrow, and on Sunday I could be building that in my house. There is not an equivalent in terms of the construction industry. So I think there's no reason why clients can't come together to commission people to design toilet pods and kitchens that they can then push to a supply chain for people to go to. And who owns IP, to me, is who pays for that initial design work in the first place.
Okay, so if we think about IKEA, I mean, that's a vertically integrated, very large company, right? So that's part of our challenge, especially in New Zealand with the scale, sort of thinking about the size of our country and what buildings you've shown. A lot of them are larger buildings, you know. How does this apply to sort of 3-level walk-ups and sort of medium density, which is, I think, the area of growth, especially in Auckland where I am? Or is this strategy, this way forward that you're talking about, really just for commercial larger buildings?
No, I think this applies to any building type, and it's as much a mindset as it is a methodology, Jane. And I think every housing project has a kitchen, and that's why I'm focusing on that. Every housing project has a bathroom pod. We definitely don't need bathrooms to be different sizes. We definitely need options so that whoever's curating it, whether it be the customer or the development team. So the way we see it here is, and I was speaking to a commission recently in London, and I think the view is that if clients can come together and say, well, let's look at what those chassis might be for a toilet pod. Let's get the designers in to look at options. And then you can put that up there onto a portal for different toilet pod manufacturers to come in and say, well, you know what? I'm interested in making these, and here's my price. So there is an element about changing procurement. But I think what procurement needs to look at is how do you drive procurement, especially around frameworks for larger components. Could be facades, could be toilet pods, could be kitchens, a whole bunch of things. So and I would argue with anyone that says that impedes design creativity, because it's not about impeding creativity, it's about creating repetition, the standard sizes. I know there's one architectural practice in London that looked at all of their toilet pods, and there was 50 mil of a difference between them all. So I think you would be amazed at just standardizing the sizes of these elements, how much that then actually mobilizes better offsite manufacturing.
Actually, you just touched on another question I had, which seems to be a bit of a fear, and that is work taken away from designers. That seems to be like a bit of a obstacle to overcome, that this is actually going to reduce the role and workload for designers. But what's your view on that? I mean, you're a designer and you're leading this. Yeah,
it doesn't concern me. I think a lot of the things that we're talking about is not where we add value to the process. I think the carbon challenge is significant, and it's certainly what we're seeing is it's making the design of buildings more complex. So what I see is by leveraging offsite manufacturing, we can reduce carbon, we can reduce waste, we can speed up the design process. I don't think it impacts on our revenue, because we want to do more projects more effectively and really bring in the manufacturers that can help to drive down costs. So I think it's about doing more projects rather than doing lots of projects and doing those projects inefficiently.
Interesting. I saw there was a question from Phil pop up and then from Dan, but I can't actually read where the questions are. Phil, maybe you could just ask the question, unmute yourself.
I can see a few here.
Hi, Dale. I just wondered if you could talk more about if you've got positive examples of like the cost of OSM versus traditional, like any manufacturers who have managed to get the cost of OSM down to
Yeah.
sort of traditional levels, and how they've done it? Was it through, increased volume, repetition, stuff like that?
Yeah. I certainly do, Phil, and brilliant question. So the reason that, and that's what I was alluding to in the presentation, the reason that we're not getting the savings now is we're designing for construction and pushing it to the factory. That's why I can't emphasize enough how different designing for manufacture is, and how if we can standardize the size of things like toilets and then look at how we then fit those out differently, that's where you get the savings. And I'm I certainly know that on a number of international projects I'm working on, the first projects are harder, and yes, you might get slightly higher capital costs, but we know that the long-term trend is lower costs. But the other thing is, if you can deliver faster, the savings come through, and this is really pertinent now in the last 6 months because of interest rates going up, is the funding costs come down. So if you can deliver a project 6 months earlier, so even with low interest rates, we were finding that offsite manufacturing was delivering lower overall costs when you take, not just the capital costs, but the funding costs. And I think now that the interest rates are higher, it's a more compelling case that if you can deliver a project faster, the capital cost might be 10% more. It should be cost neutral, but the long-term trend is it should be 20% less capital cost on top of delivering things faster that will reduce all of the funding costs. But yes, just now the stories are all around, well, it doesn't work, we can't make it work. That's because we're still designing for construction. We're not designing for manufacture and at much bigger and different scale.
Awesome, great, thanks. Good points there. I'm just reading through the questions. Dale, someone wants your top 20 of your 100 books that you've read. So maybe you could email me later what your top 20 of those 100 are, and we'll post those to this group as well. I like the decision-making focus. I do feel like that's a real challenge. There's some other questions here about scale. They seem sort of just generally grouping these questions. The investment kind of needed to set up factories and automation. I think the proposition here is that you need to produce 1,000 units a year before sort of there's any cost benefit to investing in automation and higher tech processes. Yeah. Like for New Zealand, like an order of 100 buildings at a time rather than 1,000 is a good order. So how do we overcome that scale challenge of actually moving towards sort of not just automation, but I think investment and higher tech kit and operations?
So when you start to look at platforms are not just about the offset manufacturing, it's about process as well and how you make things more efficiently. So when I talk about things like I always seem to get sucked into toilets. I don't know why I always get sucked into talking about toilets, but you can have design standards for toilets that you use as a practice that encourages standardization. I don't think that demeans what you do as a practice, but that standardization all of a sudden gets you towards something. Now, if 10 architectural practices in one of the big cities in New Zealand came together and said, you know what, let's just agree what a toilet is. Let's agree the size. I'm gonna have mosaic tiles, you're gonna have large format tiles, I'm gonna use Villeroy Bosch, you're gonna do this, but the actual carcass is going to be the same. That's the sort of thing that transformed the industry, because back to my point, you've created the same chassis. And the people that are making toilet pods going to go, guys, this is awesome. We can just hone out thousands of these things because we know that every architect in New Zealand is going to use the same chassis. Okay, they're all going to finish it differently, which is fine. That's where the creativity comes in. But we're not going to get one toilet pod that's 1,200 wide, and the next one it's 1,210 wide, and the next one it's 1,240 wide. So you'd be amazed at how just simple things like that can change the narrative, because you're actually starting to look at the whole standardization. And remember, the whole OEM, the way that the car manufacturers work is they create that kind of mechanism through performance specification and the whole design, like hard points, so that a suspension system will always fix the same way. And I think that's where some of the lessons are from automotive. It's not about how you do a production line, it's how you design for standardization and design to allow lots of people to then tender for what you do. I call it cost tension. So if you can set up a toilet pod, so say the biggest 20 architects in New Zealand came together and said, right, here's 20 things that we're going to standardize as the top 20 practices in New Zealand. You then say, we're going to put this up in this platform here. The manufacturers come in and say, oh, this is brilliant. Here's my version of that. So again, you've got the cost tension, you've got the competition, but you've just allowed things to happen very differently. So it doesn't take a huge amount. And I guess that's the point, Jane. I'm just trying to give you some of the lessons that we've had here and allow you to jumpstart your journey into this through a bit more of a kind of informed insight.
Perfect. So what my language for what you just said, it's demand led again. So it's the client setting up the structure, the kind of requirements of the chassis size, and then allowing the market to make those standards, for want of a better word, not NZS standards, but like standards for the project. Okay, so then how does a client, when they tend to think site by site, how does a client move away and adopt that mindset? Let's just take, there's a couple of people online that work in big government organizations that get decisions that get made site by site. So how do they start getting their teams to move past that mentality?
Yeah, so really good point. So the simple way to do that is if you go back to what I said earlier on, you know, when I showed that image of the ship. So why are we not designing like Johnny Ives? Because we believe that every project's different. And I think some of the observers over here would say, well, every building's designed as a prototype. Now, again, I would argue, well, no, that's not correct. That's actually not correct. We actually design buildings to be unique because actually design for construction allows that. We can move anything at any time. And one of the challenges I see is because we can change anything at any time, we bloody well do. And you know, whether it's you know, a door detail or a roof detail, we change things all the time because people say, oh, I don't think this is the right way of doing it. So the whole narrative has to change, but there's absolutely no reason why, you know, like go back to my toilet. So I always seem to get sucked back to these, is that what a toilet's got nothing to do with planning consent. It's got nothing to do with lots of different things. So there are so many parts. I do agree. Every project's got its unique challenges, whether it's, you know, a sloping site or a country. I get that. But I would say that the one I've been thinking about recently is when we design schools, there's no reason why any classroom in the world should be any different. There's no reason why a classroom in London shouldn't be any different to any classrooms you have there. But I do agree that the context and the planning, you know, the cladding material. So I think trying to break out the difference between the interiors and the spaces and the exterior. So maybe if I create a product for a school, I advocate that the head teacher has the ability to configure the classroom around the teaching aids and so on. And then the architect's got the ability to look at different facade options that allow a conversation with the local planning department. But again, people tell me all the time that I can't do what I'm already doing. And it's all about people generally protecting their traditional roles. But I think you can overcome, Jane, the complexities of individual project. And of course, we still need to do engineering aspects. We still need to prove structural frames. And I think the key thing to do, and bizarrely, I've got a meeting with a client tomorrow where we're actually doing that. We've convinced this client, well, you're commissioning us for one project. Well, let's set this up at a program level. Let's actually look at what tasks must be done on a project and what tasks can we actually pull out and do at a program level. So I think for me, the big conversation is around that. What do we have to do on an individual project? And when I say that, let's not try and make up things that we think we have to do. What is the minimum? If we were automating all this process, what's the minimum that we need to do to create great architecture, respond to a site, but at the same time, look at the rest of it being part of a whole program approach.
Okay, Thanks. We've got more questions than we have time for, so I'm going to pick out a couple. One, I know there's a few people on here that work horizontal rather than vertical. Does this apply to the horizontal sector as well? And are you doing work in that space? Real quick, and then I'm going to actually ask Sarah. There's a question, just 2 seconds, Dale. There's a question around Built Ready scheme. I know I think I saw Sarah online. There's a question around when's Built Ready going to be coming online, and how does all of this get more certainty through the building consenting process, and how do we kind of I guess incentivize this type of behavior through streamlining of the consenting process. So I'll get Sarah, if you wouldn't mind just talking about Built Ready after Dale answers the horizontal vertical question, that would be awesome. And then we've got 2 more minutes.
Yeah, you're right. If you're doing a rail project or a road project where you have to extract a lot of earth from the ground, you would think, well, where is that applicable? But certainly even for motorways like the gantry systems and so on, or even standardizing the centers for how you do let's say all the areas where the people come in for what you call it, the safety areas, the breakdown areas. So I think there's lots of opportunities there. But I think the key thing with a platform approach is it's also about repetition of process, and that is where you can really gain. So it comes back to, well, what do we keep? What decisions? Back to the decision-making thing, Jane. What decisions do we make on infrastructure projects, horizontal projects, every single bloody time? What decisions can we actually say, well, can we just stop making this decision on every project? Because we keep coming to the same conclusion. So actually looking at, so on horizontal projects, it would be about looking at decision-making and stopping making decisions every single time. Look at the decisions that are unique to a program, and look at the decisions that you absolutely, I suppose the thing I would say is, what's the minimum number of decisions that you can make on an infrastructure project that are essential for the project, and take the rest of them and deal with them at a program level and say, right, that's it, it's a done deal. This is how we're going to do this at the program level. And then the decisions we need to make in the project, this is it. These are the only ones.
Right. So same principles apply. Okay, I can see that we're at time. Sophie is online to just quickly talk about Built Ready CodeMark. Do you want to just use a minute to just give people a bit of info so they can find out more about where that's at, timing, info?
Of course. Yeah.
Thanks, Sophie.
So the scheme doesn't have all the parties needed to work at the moment, but we are hoping to have everything up and running and functioning by the end of this year as our indicative timeframe at the moment. Part of a big piece of work for us is the education for building consent authorities to get them across the line and understanding the kind of robust process that will happen within the scheme before they will see manufacturers come through at their end. So we acknowledge that that's where most of the headaches sit with offsite manufacturing in New Zealand at the moment. And that's a big part for our next piece of work. CodeMark is separate, so we're still keeping them as separate schemes. In terms of the way they're structured, they're very similar. Both are separate and have different benefits for different people. I think Sarah's just linked our website there, so feel free to have a read. We've got an inbox as well if anyone's got any questions or they just want to chat through with us about it. Then we're totally open to that. So just fire anything our way and we'll answer your questions.
Great to have you guys here. If you're not sure what Built Ready is, jump on the link that Sarah's posted, and we're obviously working very closely together so that as off-site manufacturing MMC starts to ramp up, it's definitely going to have advantages using the Built Ready scheme to certify what's going on inside the manufacturing plants to be applicable across consenting authorities across the country, so we're not having that issue around moving parts from region to region. That's one of the benefits. There's also plenty of other benefits in there, but we are out of time, so once Built Ready and is up and running and we have a bit of traction with the consenting authorities, we'll do a session on it so that you understand clearly how it works and what the benefits are. But I'd just like to thank you so much, Dale. Really appreciate you sharing your insight and look forward to your top 20 books for the team here. And yeah, this is the direction of travel that we are wanting to take here in New Zealand, and the Accord is sort of acting as the central point to try and bring people together. As you said, some of the people online are in the technical kind of working group that we have that's starting to look at what could we standardize, how could we do that, who do we need to work with, who needs to be at the table. So thanks for all of those of you who have participated. If you want to get more involved, just email me directly, connect with me on LinkedIn, or just find my email address. Maybe Jen, you could post it here. And yeah, appreciate your time, Dale, and you can go back to your evening. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day. Any last words from you, Dale?
No, I would just say, Jane, I'm incredibly excited about what's happening. But I mean, the more I delve into it, the more I realize that we need to embrace the change and look at all these different ways of designing, the same way that, you know, our colleagues 500 years ago thought, well, this is actually something different, but it's actually better. So I don't think any profession's got anything to fear about this. It's about actually making us, freeing up the time that we can actually deal with the challenges of net zero. And I'm just so as you know, Jane, I'm amped up about this, and I'm incredibly excited. And I just want to share that excitement with everyone else to say, look, don't be scared about this. This is actually a brilliant thing. It allows us to design better. It allows end users more choice. There's no downside to this. There's no downside.
Great.
So,
well, thank you for your positivity, and look forward to you joining our international advisory group as we go through this process of our work plan that we have for the next couple of years, and really appreciate your time. Thanks, everyone. We'll close there.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks for the invite, Jane.
Thank you.
Cheers.